Coinage's Crypto Project of the Year celebration is back, spotlighting the top projects in crypto, highlighting the original ETH killer, Solana. Boasting faster speeds than Ethereum, Solana has become home for everything from DPIN to Memecoins, and this year solidified it as an ecosystem stalwart after surging 230% since we featured them last year. Which nominated project deserves to be crowned Crypto's Project of the Year? You decide. Head to Coinage.media to vote. All right, well, it's been a hell of a year for Solana and the entire ecosystem, not just meme coins to talk about. I want to be very clear about that and very excited to have on the show today, making his Coinage debut, Mert Mumtaz. Mert, it's good to see you, man. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I think, obviously you're a big voice in the Solana ecosystem. You've been around for a while. You've been through the ups, the downs, and now the ups, mostly this year. And, nominated as perhaps the least surprising Crypto Project of the Year nominee in terms of everything that Solana's ecosystem's been cooking on this year. A lot to get into, but I guess maybe we just start with your background because you've kind of been, a voice that I have a lot of respect for in the space because it's not just full-on shill zone, which sometimes people who are in ecosystems, the deeper they go, the less problems they see, the fewer the problems they see. But for you, I guess just start with a little bit of your background in terms of why you've been building in the Solana ecosystem and what this year has been like for you as someone so deep in it.
Sure. To start, so I was a tech lead for Coinbase. I was a software developer there. Slightly before they went public is when I joined. And there I got to work on all sorts of blockchains, mostly Ethereum, Polygon, somewhat Optimism. And that's also when I discovered Solana. And I would, during my own time, build apps for all sorts of different chains and basically noticed a lot of issues with all of them. The biggest issue that I noticed, perhaps on a grander scale for crypto, is the lack of real useful applications. And that problem still annoys me quite a bit today. And the thought in my head was, okay, so what is the highest leverage thing I could be doing to help solve this problem, or at least make somewhat of a difference given my skill set and where I want the industry to go? And I landed at building app infrastructure for developers so that they can bring their ideas to life as fast as possible. And for that, they needed to build apps, obviously, on a chain that scales with good UX, predictable fees, all these things. And so we started Helius to solve most of those problems. And we made pretty good progress so far, but still a long way to go.
Yeah, in terms of, I guess, I've seen a lot of comparisons to Consensus and what they do for the Ethereum ecosystem and Helius and what kind of you guys do for Solana. But I guess, increasingly, as the case has been, Solana is kind of making progress on all kinds of fronts. I guess for you, too, in terms of seeing the opportunities back then, now here we are as Crypto Project of the Year 2024 and focusing on Solana. What has been kind of the coolest thing for you to watch as someone who's been building in the space for so long? To kind of see Solana make those inroads, those progress, because there's so many different things going on now. I know Pump.fun gets a lot of attention, but what does Mert say about what's been the biggest thing this year?
The biggest thing this year, that's a good question. I would say with Solana, the vision that Tolly would describe has always been sort of this decentralized NASDAQ, or blockchain at NASDAQ speeds is what he'll say. And another way of looking at that is something like global capital markets, but on chain, permissionless markets, but on chain. And if you start from that lens, then you can see, or you can start to map out how the entire ecosystem functions. And what I mean by that is, so meme coins, of course, are one type of market where there's a lot of meme coins. There's a lot of people willing to buy them, a lot of people willing to sell them, a lot of people willing to build infrastructure around them and use other things such as Camino or Jupiter or Jito to access these markets. But it's not the only market, right? So in 2021, Solana was known for being the NFT chain, or one of the big NFT chains. And it's also quite prominent in terms of real world things. So DPIN, right? Things like helium, which Helios gets confused with all the time, or
Yeah, we had
things
Helium
like,
on last week. Not the same. Just a quick disclaimer.
right, or things like Hive Mapper, which is decentralized mapping, Beam Network, which is decentralized CDNs, decentralized GPU rendering, energy grids, all these sorts of things. Plus, another favorite of mine is just straight up payments. So taking some token and then moving it through different types of rails, on ramps, off ramps. I think those have all been they've all seen growth this year. Obviously, meme coins are generally the most viral ones due to obviously their social elements, but also just the sheer volume that they came with. But for me, the thing that I was the biggest fan of course, with running Helios is the new number of developers that have entered the chain. So
Yeah.
there used to be memes around how Solana only has 75 developers and they're all leaving because it's very hard and Rust is this obscure language and all these things. Turns out there's now thousands of developers on Solana and more onboarding every single day. So the most recent example would be something like Pudgy Penguins coming over to Solana to launch their new Pengu token.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good kind of thing to consider, and obviously the memes and the meta of kind of NFTs melting away and meme tokens taking off has been there. I guess also it's just to kind of demonstrate kind of the speed, transaction throughput, like everything that's possible on Solana. You kind of start with meme tokens and Squint. We just had Mike on, co-founder of Pith, also talking about tokenizing real world assets and everything from bonds and stocks on chain. And you can easily see where that goes. I mean, is it weird for you sometimes to see all the coverage be focused so much on meme coins when, underneath the hood, all of this is still happening in terms of real infrastructure being built?
Well, I wouldn't say weird. It's pretty expected due to the Pareto nature of how most of these things work. Memes are, by definition, designed to go viral, and they're funny. They have a social element, which obviously infects the social layer. And the more attention they get via social networks, the bigger they go. And then all sorts of characters pop up to promote them and everything that goes along with that. So I think it's very well expected. I don't think it's weird that they have the most attention. What I would say, though, is it is incorrect to say something like, well, all Solana has are meme coins, right? So what you might say is the main use case of crypto this cycle tends to be meme coins and speculation, as with most other cycles beforehand have been all speculation based, either
Yeah.
ICOs or NFTs and now meme coins. It just turns out that Solana provides the best experience for launching tokens, moving them around, trading them, holding them on your wallet. And that can't happen unless we have infrastructure that actually works and scales with the amount of users.
Yeah, I think what's interesting now, and obviously it's been fun to kind of talk to all these different founders in terms of, how they capture that narrative, how they really rally. And, it's not just a celebration of what happened in 2024, but also looking ahead to 2025. When you look at TVL, and I know that, this is kind of a foregone metric. Not a lot of people respect TVL that much anymore, but certainly, another big year for Solana in terms of all the different use cases, as you said, not just meme coins. I think we have that chart to show in terms of maybe some of this. But I will say, Mert, when it comes to maybe fitting into some of these other things, your background, as you said, at Coinbase, it's been interesting to watch kind of this back and forth tug of war between kind of L1s and, Solana versus the Ethereum scaling roadmap. I'd be curious to get your take on maybe Solana versus that and what's happening in Ethereum, because we just had Jesse on from Base. He was kind of talking, not directly, to be fair, about Solana, just kind of the idea of L2s versus that. I want to play a little bit of the clip that we have from Jesse Pollock and get your take on the other side in terms of maybe the differences that are starting to evolve between L2s and the other opportunities to scale. Take a listen to what he said.
I think that the Ethereum strategy is working. Like we articulated a few years ago, this idea of a roll-up centric strategy in terms of scaling. And then the last thing that I'll say is I think it's like somewhat ironic and funny and indicative of the fact that this is all just noise, where you have people who are saying, oh yeah, Ethereum L2s are so fragmented, you should come use my new L1 chain that's like totally disconnected from everyone else. Like what are you advocating for there? Are you saying that, oh no, actually we should have 100 or 1,000 L1s that have no interconnection between them and no shared roadmap and no strategy for interoperability? Or are you just saying actually everything's going to fit into your L1 and like you
Yeah.
don't want to work with anyone else to build the future?
Now, I'm not sure that he was talking so much about Solana there as many of the other newer L1 entrants, but what does Mert say kind of about that tug of war?
Sure. Well, the reason why there tends to be noise around conversations of this nature is because that was a straw man, right? So, in terms of fragmentation, it is correct that, of course, the more L1s you have or the more L2s you have, it doesn't matter what the number after the L is, the user experience is going to be more fragmented. Now, that could perhaps be fixed. And I believe that it probably will be fixed. I've invested in a few companies in this space, even on Ethereum. But I don't think that's been the main critique of the L2 roadmap. Depending on who you ask, they'll, of course, have different critiques of the L2 roadmap. Mine has been sort of the amount of compromises that have been swept under the rug and not necessarily acknowledged as much as I would like them to be. So, for example, a common theme will be something like, well, Solana is very centralized, but then the contrast is an L2, which is a single server, which is governed by a multi-sig that the team controls, right? So if that's the framing you're going with, then you don't have any business saying Solana is centralized, right? I don't have anything against L2s inherently. I've actually invested in L2s. And I also do not think that everything should be on a single chain, and it won't be, right? What matters the most is working backwards from the needs of the business and the use cases, and then finding the best architecture or solution that actually works for them. So, for example, if this is something like an indie game where you don't have to do many things on chain, or perhaps you don't have to compose with different types of markets, then that does not need to be on Solana, right? But for example, if you are somebody like Jupiter, where your business relies on atomic composability across dexes underneath, then yes, Solana makes sense. So it is entirely dependent on the use cases. So without having more context, it's hard to comment on what's better for a given team.
Yeah.
One thing I will say is that most of the arguments that I put forward in the past few years have simply been about double standards, where somebody will say Solana does not have X, but then the proposed L2 will do X much worse, right? And so one good example of this is people used to troll Solana quite frequently about failed transactions on chain due to bots attempting arbitrages on certain markets. And when Base got that new Memecoin launchpad on their chain, they started bragging about how much TPS they were doing. But if you looked at the TPS numbers, 50% of those transactions were failed transactions, right? And so that is a double standard. And that's what I particularly don't enjoy, or I think should be called out more. But in general, I don't have anything against L2s or L1s. Now, of course, there's things to be said around which one is the most economically sustainable, right?
Yeah.
Does Base making 85% of the revenue and passing only a tiny sliver back to Ethereum actually scale? Well, perhaps it could if everybody uses ETH as money and then the blobs enter price discovery mode such that there's actually good value capture on all incentivized participants of that chain.
Yeah.
So perhaps that could work, but we haven't seen that so far. So it seems fair to call that out. But then, of course, the other thing is that there are many competing L2 standards as well, right? It's not just L1s competing with L1s, but Base is part of the Optimism Collective, which includes Optimism, Base, Kraken, a few other newer chains. But then they're competing with somebody like Arbitrum, who will say bad things about them on the internet, and vice versa, which will then compete with ZK Sync, which will then compete with Starknet, and then Mega ETH, and it keeps going on and on. So there's nothing specific to L2s there, or even specific to L1s. It's just it's a market that people are trying to go after.
Yeah, and it's a limited, I suppose, size of the pie, as you said, unless the pie continues to grow, and I guess we'll see. I think it has been fun to kind of at least see differing takes, differing roadmaps and strategies to scale. And I think even Anatoly, when he came on with us, never really a hostile guy. Takes a lot to really piss Anatoly off, I think, at least in my interactions with him. Very low key. It's the San Diego vibe. It's the California vibe out there, I suppose. But when it comes to the other side of things, Mert, the L1 piece, I think it has been interesting and crazy to think that we only had Anatoly out here, just like maybe months ago in terms of talking about the ETH killer. All right, that may have been in 22, but the ETH killer idea of Solana. And now already people talking about Solana killers. The space moves that fast. But you're already seeing a bunch of kind of performance L1s pop up. And I think the thing that maybe people get wrong all the time is that it's not just pure performance, right? It's not. That's not the only thing. As you said, there's also everything from culture, developers, kind of catching that momentum. There are a bunch of other L1s in our project of the year. I'm curious kind of what you make of maybe some of the noise around other L1s, potentially copying the playbook that Solana delivered so well on, and what you see from maybe that side of things.
I believe that... So I've invested in a few of these L1s or startups that are building on these L1s, so I welcome it.
Mm-hmm.
I do. Fundamentally, we need to be kept accountable by the market and customers and users of these blockchains. And if there's no competition, then there's no real evolutionary mechanism to enforce that. And so if you have competition, that makes it fun because we can now say, okay, these chains are doing X better than us. Is X important, first of all? And if it is, can we improve it? And that's the mentality that I have, which is let's compete, let's go for it. And if you guys make us better, then great, thank you. And then perhaps we'll make you better as well. So one of the things about just the general discourse around L1s or even L2s is on Twitter, especially, the trade-offs tend to be obfuscated. So, for example, something with 2,000 geographically decentralized validators is obviously a different type of chain than an L1 with perhaps, let's say, 100 nodes that are, let's say, co-located within a single continent.
Mm-hmm.
So it'll depend on, again, this goes back to my previous point about the business's use cases. Now, if the business does not care that much about top security, perhaps you're okay with that compromise. But if they do, then they'll need something else that's perhaps has better decentralization or security, or in Solana's case, censorship resistance guarantees, right? So it'll all depend as the markets continue to evolve and the use cases emerge, which types of architectures actually matter for these use cases, right? You can perhaps look at an example from the real world, right? So if there's PlayStation, there's Xbox, there's PC, but then there's Game Boy, there's mobile games. There are that weird Japanese one where you take care of a little animal type of
Tamagotchi.
thing. There's different, yes.
I love
and so the thing that they have in common is that they're all gaming consoles, right? Yet the games that you can play on them, or the types of developers that would build their games on top of those, are all relatively different, right? A Game Boy developer might be successful in Game Boy, but perhaps they won't be successful in the newest version of Xbox or the newest version of Oculus, or I guess it's called MetaQuest now. And so, again, crypto falls into the same bucket, which is the tech itself gets focused on to the exclusion of the use cases and the markets. And that's completely incorrect. It needs to be backwards. It needs to be, for example, if the main use case of crypto tends to be in 20 years, let's say, something like ZK verifiable identity, okay, then perhaps we need a blockchain that specializes in that. Maybe we need to use L2s versus maybe if it uses something that's on-chain order books, maybe that looks more like a Solana.
Well, I think that's been interesting too, though, because, in my question in terms of, the playbook being copied, there was the Solana phone, the saga. It got a lot of eyeballs and a lot of attention. Obviously, Tony's background in terms of, I guess, working on some of these things, and Helium, as you said, it makes a lot of sense in the Solana ecosystem. But then you have other projects who have also leaned into gaming, looking at, Swee's a good example. The Sui Play device that they launched and kind of rolled out similar strategy. You add some meme tokens, and suddenly you're getting a phone that pays for itself, or a gaming device that pays for itself. And I think it is really interesting to see projects, like you said, okay, they're doing something that might work for us. Let's try that. Let's twist this. Let's see if this works. It's just kind of fun, obviously, as someone who has no skin in the game whatsoever, just watching it all play out. Very interesting to see. But I guess, Mert, in terms of where things go from here, look, we don't give our community of NFT holders any sort of guidance in terms of crowning crypto project of the year. There are no guidelines. To be honest, some people look at the charts and they say, look, that's why it's good, is because number went up. Obviously, Solana's run in 2024, pretty incredible. The run since the FTX collapse, extremely incredible. Maintaining something like that is always tricky, though, right? In terms of what have you done for me lately? And so when we look ahead to 2025, what are you most excited about in terms of maybe moving beyond what Solana was able to do in 24 and iterating on the things that worked well? What has you most excited for Solana?
I would say you can think of it in two dimensions. One is, of course, the infrastructure around the chain, the scalability, the security, decentralization. All these things need to keep improving to lead the industry. And with that, we have things such as FireDancer, which will be a new Solana validator client, which is aimed at enhancing performance, but also adding redundancy for security and decentralization. Or things like Double Zero, which is a project I'm probably most excited by, where they aim to basically build a new internet layer by leveraging newer fiber networks, but also decentralizing the internet stack a little bit. And we need to do those always. Fundamentally, blockchains are engineering projects and systems, and that part cannot be overlooked. In terms of the other dimension, something that I believe very strongly in is that the blockchains who prevail going forward can be thought of as cities, in a sense, where to succeed, you need to attract the most talented, high quality people, right? Just like when you think of a startup today, you think, okay, Silicon Valley or finance, Wall Street. When you think of building something on chain, the chain that captures that mind share needs to be the one that's most founder friendly, most startup friendly, and has a culture around maintaining that and enforcing those standards and principles amongst community members. Solana has things like Super Team, which is a global community with different hubs all over the world, including UAE, but also Japan, Canada, even the US now. And I believe that aspect needs to be pristine and very fine-tuned, because fundamentally, it doesn't matter what the tech is that you built if you're not able to attract top talent to actually come and build on those chains or those ecosystems. So those are the two things.
I did want to ask you about FireDancer and the update there too, though, because it's been something that Anatolia's been talking about and obviously has been hyped since maybe the end of 22 in terms of, hey, this next client's coming, everything's going to be better. Outages, don't worry about them, speed, blah, everything like that. And then I heard about Fogo and this idea of, the Jump team had been working on FireDancer for quite some time. And then the idea of, hey, maybe, we're not going to kind of do this for the benefit of Solana writ large, but maybe we should have our own kind of chain too. It seemed like it caught a lot of people by surprise. I don't know if there's maybe an element there too in terms of value capture from established players that could also hurt Solana just by the same metric that you pointed out for L2s and the Ethereum roadmap. I mean, what's going on with that? What should people know? And what's the right way to think about FireDancer, Jump, Fogo, etc.?
So I learned about Fogo quite a few months ago, and at that time, and my information might be outdated here, is that it is akin to something like PithNet, where PithNet is actually its own SVM L1, where it does PithNet-specific things, but also interfaces with Solana. For example, my company Helius runs nodes on PithNet. And Fogo seems to be something similar to that. I believe it's also a permissioned network, so it's not apples and oranges. And the validator set, again, as I said in the earlier one, will be different. I believe it won't be, I think it'll be a few tens of validators. And perhaps that's useful for other use cases. And the way I think about this is, look, if they do the job for a certain customer better than another product, then they should win. That's how a market works, right? If you're solving a problem for a customer better than a different service or product, that's how it should work. That's how a free market works. That's what startups are for. And so if they can do that, they should. In terms of how this would affect Solana, I don't see it as a bad for Solana, just like how I didn't see PithNet as a bad for Solana. I think it's actually a good. Solana's tech being more prevalent in different communities is fundamentally good because there's more developers comfortable with it. And there's more mind share about it. There's more tooling, documentation, education, all these sorts of things. And fundamentally, the thing that Solana cares about is eliminating single points of failure. So if we now have multiple clients such that one client going down isn't enough to wreck the chain, that's already much better for Solana if you just compare Solana to itself before, which I think is the only valuable comparison at this time.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. I guess the smartest way to wrap this up too, and when we think about, there's two questions that I have for you, Mert, just to kind of wrap it all up. One, kind of more Solana focused, because as we know, you're on here representing the entire Solana ecosystem, so no pressure. But it would be the final kind of, hey, this is why Solana should be Crypto Project of the Year selling point, which will give you that for sure. In fact, we'll start there, and then the last question is kind of space wide. Mert's big, bold predictions for 2025. We love having people on who have founded companies, who are deep in the sauce, who have seen some shit, ready to talk about some shit, and see things before other people do. And so we'll get your big, bold prediction on 25 first. But before we do, before we do, just kind of want to give you your shot to kind of explain why Solana is still top dog, should stay top dog, will always be top dog in terms of Crypto Project of the Year.
Well, I don't think it will always be top dog unless we continue to execute at the pace we've been executing at. Nothing is guaranteed, so we just got to keep putting in the work and keep solving problems for customers. That's the only way. And technology is an infinite game, so it doesn't end. We just have to keep competing, keep attracting the best people, the smartest people, and the most interesting ideas to have a shot. In terms of why I believe it's the project of the year, I would say amongst blockchains. So I wouldn't say it's the project of the year in terms of, for example, application layers or VC funds and all these different things if you combine them. Yeah. I think it'd be a top contender, but that's a much bolder claim. In terms of blockchains, though, we've shown a few things. We've shown that with affordable, cheap fees on a single L1, we can still enable a great user experience while also giving validators recognizable and meaningful economic activity and revenue, which this gets overlooked a lot, but this was not thought to be possible. It was thought that you can only do this via L2s and while having the L1 fees expensive and then L2s paying the L1. We've now shown that's not correct. And we have also shown the value of a single global ledger and the idea of focusing on the user and the customers and the UX to be above all else, as opposed to some of these other scientific project types, let's say, on other ecosystems. So I would say, and the thing that's I think most impressive is that we came back from death, right? People were calling us dead. They were saying, oh, everybody left. You're only successful because of this. Your chain won't scale. Your chain is going to go broke. You don't have enough fees. They will not be able to afford the nodes. Everybody has said all these things about us for this entire time. So we've been doing this against opposition, constant opposition this whole time. And we overcame that. And the reason is twofold. One is we are engineers at heart and we focus on the user and actually making things that work. And then two is the community really rallies behind that vision of decentralized NASDAQ and increasing bandwidth, reducing latency. And when you have an aligned community like that, it tends to accomplish a lot of great things.
Yeah, the comeback has been fierce and has been notable. And as we've discussed with Anatoly, it was wild to see last year that comeback and continued here in 2024. One of the repeat nominees for Crypto Project of the Year. But Mert, to wrap, as I said, love having smart guys like yourself on the show just to look ahead for what people might be missing. In terms of big, bold claims, what's the one you want to go on record for? So when we have you back on in 25, we could say, oh shit, that guy was right. What's the top of mind thing that might not be consensus yet, but will be? It doesn't need to be Solana, by the way. It could be crypto writ large.
Something I am starting to cultivate a thesis on. I haven't gathered all the data, but I'm just going with my gut feel based on vibes.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm very ready for this to be proven extremely wrong, is that by next year, this time, I don't think the AI agent buzz will last. I think most of these, or almost all of these AI agent plays are basically a different type of meme coin.
Hot take. Yeah. I mean, I guess because you don't believe in like the actual idea of them being autonomous at all and it's just all just fake, or that people get tired of it.
I believe there are certain things that crypto enables for these AI agents to be more effective, but they don't have to be on crypto rails. They can be on different types of rails. And I also don't think that most of these, I won't say most, but some of these AI agents, which people are flocking to because they have spicy takes on Twitter, I don't actually think those are all AI. I would say some of those might actually be real humans. So we'll see how it plays out.
I've seen the same thing, and it's kind of not too different. Look, I always give credit. I always respect a good old-fashioned, hey, let me step in. There's some money to be made here. And I would agree with you. I think there is a lot of stuff that looks pretty man-made out there. But look, the space does a pretty good job of finding value, or at least people who might want to give you money for not real things. Mert, can't thank you enough for coming on, man. This is really fun. And like I said, when the thesis is fully proven out, feel free to come back on, and we'll see what happens in Crypto Project of the Year. All good things to Solana. Thanks again for the time, man. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.